A powerful man leaves a joyful lunch beside his beautiful wife, feeling complete. But everything changes when a poor girl hands him a watch that had fallen from her bag, along with a romantic note. Overcome with suspicion, he uncovers betrayals, manipulations, and plans to completely destroy him. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Beacon Hill as Richard Hartwell escorted his wife from Sorellina, one of Boston's most exclusive Italian restaurants. At 55, Richard, known to most as Rick, carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from building Hartwell Investments from nothing into a financial powerhouse. His salt and pepper hair and tailored Brioni suit complemented his distinguished appearance, a stark contrast to the fresh-faced MBA graduates who populated Boston's financial district. The truffle risotto was divine, Vanessa Hartwell said, sliding her arm through his. At 32, she was strikingly beautiful, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her figure accentuated by a designer dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. 5 years into their marriage, Rick still sometimes found himself wondering how he'd managed to convince this former actress to settle down with him. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, darling," Rick replied, guiding her toward where his Bentley awaited at the curb. "I thought we could both use a break from the chaos." The past few weeks had been particularly demanding. Rick was finalizing a major expansion of Hartwell Investments' portfolio into sustainable energy, a project he'd been working on with Thomas Blackwood, his chief financial officer and oldest friend. Tom had been with him for 15 years, weathering every storm alongside him. As they approached the car, a well-dressed man in his 40s bumped hard into Vanessa, causing her to stumble slightly. Her handbag fell open, spilling its contents onto the sidewalk. "I'm so sorry," the man muttered, keeping his head down as he hastily gathered her belongings. Before Rick could properly react, the stranger had thrust everything back into Vanessa's hands and disappeared into the crowd of pedestrians flowing along Beacon Street. "How rude," Vanessa huffed, clutching her bag close. "He didn't even look me in the eye." Rick frowned. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, smoothing her dress, "just startled." They had barely taken 5 more steps when a small voice called out behind them. "Excuse me, sir, ma'am." Rick turned to find a young girl, perhaps 11 or 12, standing before them. Her clothes were clean but clearly worn, her sneakers scuffed from extended use. Despite her modest appearance, she carried herself with unusual dignity. In her hands was a gleaming Patek Philippe watch. Rick recognized the Calatrava model instantly, and what appeared to be a folded note. "This fell out of your bag," the girl said, addressing Vanessa while extending the items toward Rick. "I thought you'd want it back." Rick stared at the watch in confusion. It certainly wasn't his own Patek was securely fastened to his wrist. He glanced at Vanessa, whose expression flickered momentarily before settling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, sweetie," Vanessa said, reaching for the items, but Rick gently intercepted them. The note was on high-quality stationery, folded once. He caught a glimpse of what appeared to be romantic prose before Vanessa's manicured fingers plucked both items from his grasp. "How thoughtful of you," she said to the girl, slipping both watch and note into her purse with practiced casualness. "We appreciate your honesty." Rick pulled out his wallet, extracted 5 $20 bills, and offered them to the child. "What's your name, young lady?" "Lily," she replied, hesitating before accepting the money. "Lily Parker." "Well, Lily Parker, that was very kind of you," Rick said, studying her face. There was an intelligence in her eyes that struck him, a watchfulness beyond her years. "Do your parents know you're out here alone?" Something guarded crossed her features. "I can take care of myself, sir." Vanessa tugged at Rick's arm. "We should go, Richard. We'll be late for the foundation meeting." Rick nodded, though he had no recollection of any foundation meeting scheduled for that afternoon. As they walked away, he glanced back to see Lily still watching them, her small frame almost swallowed by the crowd of passing business people and tourists. Inside the Bentley, Rick turned to Vanessa. "I didn't know we had a foundation meeting." "Today," She was busy checking her phone, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. It was added last minute. The Children's Hospital Initiative, remember? Rick nodded, though the explanation felt hollow. His mind returned to the watch and note. A surprise gift for him, perhaps. Vanessa occasionally surprised him with extravagant presents, though usually on significant dates. "That watch," he began casually. "Is it just a surprise I was planning?" Vanessa cut in, her voice light but tense. "You weren't supposed to see it yet." Rick smiled, deciding to play along. "Well, I'll pretend I didn't." The rest of the drive passed in unusual silence. Rick found himself studying his wife's profile as she stared out the window, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. After 5 years of marriage, he thought he knew every expression that crossed her beautiful face, but lately he'd caught glimpses of someone he didn't recognize. Back at their Beacon Hill townhouse, a historic brownstone Rick had purchased and renovated shortly before their wedding, Vanessa excused herself to make calls for her volunteer work with the Boston Arts Foundation. Rick retreated to his home office, the watch and note still nagging at him. If it was truly a surprise gift, why hadn't Vanessa mentioned it by dinner or before bed? As the evening wore on with no acknowledgement of the incident, Rick's curiosity deepened into a vague unease. The following days only heightened his concern. Vanessa seemed distracted, checking her phone more frequently, disappearing for hours to volunteer meetings that somehow never appeared in the Foundation's official calendar. When he called the Foundation office once to leave her a message, the receptionist seemed confused, stating that Vanessa hadn't been expected that day. On Thursday evening, Rick returned from his office earlier than usual. He found Vanessa in the middle of what appeared to be an intense phone conversation in their bedroom. "We need to accelerate the timeline," she was saying, her voice low and tense. "He's starting to notice. No, I don't think he suspects, but—" She stopped abruptly upon seeing Rick in the doorway, her face transforming instantly into a welcoming smile. "I have to go. We'll talk later." "Important call?" Rick asked casually. "Just the gala committee," she replied, setting her phone down. "Planning the winter fundraiser. You know how these society women can be, everything's a crisis." Rick nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching an actress perform. The realization struck him with an ironic twist. Vanessa had been an actress when they met, albeit a struggling one. "I thought we could go out tonight," he suggested. "That new French place in Back Bay you've been wanting to try." "I'd love to, but I promised the hospital committee I'd review their funding proposals tonight," she said, brushing her lips against his cheek. Rain check. Later that night, as Vanessa slept beside him, Rick lay awake, replaying recent events in his mind. The incident with the watch, the secretive phone calls, the vague excuses, all of it pointed to something he didn't want to face. Was Vanessa having an affair? The thought twisted in his stomach, both painful and humiliating. The next morning, Rick left for his office earlier than usual, his mind churning with suspicions he couldn't quite articulate. As he walked from his parking garage toward the Hartwell Investments building in the financial district, a small figure stepped out from behind a newspaper stand. "Mr. Hartwell?" Rick stopped short, recognizing Lily Parker immediately. In the clear morning light, he could see her more distinctly. Auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, intelligent hazel eyes, and clothes that, while clean, spoke of limited means. "Lily," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She glanced around nervously before meeting his gaze. "I need to tell you something. About your wife." Rick felt a chill that had nothing to do with Boston's autumn breeze. "What about my wife?" "I've seen her before," Lily said, her young voice steady despite her obvious anxiety. "With that man who bumped into her. They meet at the public garden near the duck statues. They always look worried, like they're arguing about something important." Rick's world tilted slightly on its axis. "How do you know this?" "I spend a lot of time around the city," she explained. "When you don't have much, you notice things others don't." As Rick processed this information, a hollow feeling expanded in his chest, the beginning of a revelation he wasn't prepared to face. Rick stood frozen on the sidewalk, Boston's financial district bustling around him as Lily's words sank in. The girl watched him carefully, her hazel eyes measuring his reaction. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked, his voice controlled, despite the turmoil inside. Lily shifted her weight from one worn sneaker to the other. "My mum always says that truth matters even when it hurts, and—" She hesitated. "You were kind to me, not everyone is." Rick checked his watch. A board meeting awaited, one he couldn't miss, but this felt infinitely more important. "Do you have time for breakfast? I'd like to hear more." 10 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner of a cafe near Post Office Square. Rick had ordered Lily a stack of pancakes that she approached with the measured restraint of someone unaccustomed to such indulgences. "How often have you seen them together?" Rick asked after the waitress moved away. 4 times, Lily replied precisely. "Always on Tuesdays around noon. They talk for exactly 15 minutes, then leave separately." "And you're certain it's my wife?" Lily nodded. "Same blonde hair, same way of walking, expensive clothes. And she calls him Tom." The name hit Rick like a physical blow. Tom Thomas Blackwood, his CFO, his friend of 15 years, the man who had stood beside him as best man at his wedding to Vanessa. "This Tom," Rick said carefully. "Would you recognize him if you saw a picture?" When Lily nodded, Rick pulled out his phone and scrolled to a recent company photograph. He turned the screen toward her, showing a group of executives standing before the Hartwell Investments logo. Without hesitation, Lily pointed to Thomas Blackwood. "That's him." Rick felt as though the floor beneath him had dissolved. Tom and Vanessa, the 2 people he trusted most in the world, meeting secretly. His mind raced through possibilities, a surprise party being planned perhaps, some charitable initiative they wanted to unveil at the perfect moment. But the furtive nature of their meetings, combined with Vanessa's recent behavior, pointed to something far less innocent. "Mr. Hartwell?" Lily's voice pulled him back. "Are you okay?" "Yes," he lied. "Just thinking." He studied her for a moment. "Lily, where do you live? Where are your parents?" Her expression closed slightly. "My mum works 3 jobs. We have an apartment in Dorchester. She does her best." "And your father?" "Left when I was 4. Mum says he wasn't ready for responsibility." Rick nodded, understanding more about her self-reliance now. "Shouldn't you be in school today?" "Teacher Development Day," she said, a little too quickly. Rick didn't press the issue. Instead, he wrote his private number on a napkin and slid it across the table. "If you see them again, or if you think of anything else that might be important, would you call me? I'd appreciate it." Lily studied the napkin before carefully folding it into her pocket. "I will." After paying for breakfast and ensuring Lily had fare for public transportation, Rick continued to his office. He moved through his day mechanically, the board meeting, conference calls, budget reviews, while his mind remained fixated on what he'd learned. That evening, after Vanessa announced she needed to attend an emergency meeting for the Arts Foundation, Rick made his move. He'd never invaded her privacy before, but the weight of suspicion overrode his usual principles. In their bedroom, he located her laptop and, after a moment's hesitation, opened it. The password screen glowed accusingly. He tried her birthday, their anniversary, her childhood pet's name, all unsuccessfully. Then, remembering a glimpse over her shoulder once, he tried Stardust 1990, the title and year of the independent film that had been her only significant acting credit. The screen unlocked. Rick's legal training had taught him to be methodical. He began with her email, finding nothing immediately suspicious in her inbox. Her browser history had been cleared recently, itself perhaps a warning sign. He moved to her documents folder, scanning spreadsheets of household expenses and foundation work. Then he found it, a folder labeled simply TB Documents. Inside were copies of corporate agreements, investment portfolios, and most alarmingly, detailed information about Hartwell Investments' ownership structure. Several documents contained Rick's electronic signature, though he had no recollection of signing them. There were also PDFs of what appeared to be medical evaluations, with his name on them, describing symptoms of cognitive decline and psychological instability. "What the hell?" he whispered to the empty room. A text message. Alert on Vanessa's connected iPad drew his attention. The message appeared from someone listed only as TB in her contacts. TB. Has he signed the power of attorney yet? Vanessa. Working on it. Need more time. TB. The Swiss group won't wait forever. The final timeline is approaching. Vanessa. I know what I'm doing. He trusts me. Rick's hands trembled slightly as he set down the iPad. The Swiss group, likely referred to the European investment consortium that Tom had been courting for months, supposedly to expand Hartwell investments internationally. Rick had been hesitant, wanting more information before proceeding. Now, he understood the pressure to move quickly. He took photos of the most incriminating documents with his phone, then carefully returned everything to its original state. When Vanessa returned home later that evening, he greeted her with a practiced smile, playing the role of unsuspecting husband while his mind raced with implications. The sea. Next morning, Rick arrived at his office earlier than usual. Before his assistant or any other employees arrived, he accessed the company's secure server, searching for communications between Tom and the supposed Swiss investors. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The consortium wasn't investing in Hartwell investments. They were purchasing controlling interest through a complex series of transactions designed to ultimately transfer ownership away from Rick. More. Disturbing were draft documents for an emergency board meeting where medical evidence would be presented showing Rick's diminished capacity, creating grounds for removing him from leadership. The power of attorney that Vanessa was trying to get him to sign would complete the trap, giving her control over his personal assets while Tom engineered the corporate takeover. The betrayal was staggering in its comprehensiveness. Every detail had been considered, every vulnerability exploited. The watch incident suddenly made sense. It had been planted to create confusion, to make Rick question his own perceptions and perhaps even his memory. It was the first step in portraying him as mentally unstable. As the morning sun climbed higher over Boston Harbor, Rick sat alone in his office, confronting the truth that the two people he trusted most had been methodically planning his personal and professional destruction. The woman he'd loved and the friend he'd trusted had been conspiring for how long? Had their relationship predated his marriage to Vanessa? Had the entire relationship been a calculated move in a long-term strategy? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They're meeting again. Public garden by the duck statues. Now, Lily. Rick grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. As he crossed the public garden 10 minutes later, he spotted them immediately. Vanessa and Tom standing close together near the bronze duck statues from the famous children's book. Even from a distance, their body language spoke of intimacy and urgency. Tom's hand rested on Vanessa's arm as he spoke intently, his expression serious beneath his silver hair. Rick concealed himself behind a large oak tree, his heart pounding as he watched the betrayal play out in broad daylight. He was too far away to hear their conversation, but he could see Vanessa nodding, her hand occasionally brushing Tom's chest in a gesture far too familiar for a business relationship. As they parted ways, Rick noticed a small figure on a park bench, Lily, pretending to read a book while observing the meeting. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod before returning to her book. Rather than confronting them immediately, Rick returned to his office, his mind working through options. Direct confrontation would alert them, giving them time to cover their tracks or accelerate their plans. No, he needed to understand the full scope of their scheme first. That evening, when Vanessa mentioned casually that she'd scheduled a meeting with their estate attorney to update some paperwork, Rick recognized his opportunity. "That's good timing," he said, matching her casual tone. "I've been thinking about putting more protections in place. Tom mentioned something about powers of attorney being useful if either of us were incapacitated." Vanessa's eyes flickered with surprise before warming with calculated approval. "Exactly. It's just responsible planning." "Tom's always looking out for us," Rick said, watching her closely. We're lucky to have him. He's your oldest friend, she agreed smoothly. He only wants what's best. Later that night, as Vanessa slept, Rick sent a text to Lily's number. Thank you for today. Can we meet tomorrow? I'd like to help you too. The response came quickly. Copley Square Fountain, 4 p.m. The next day, as afternoon shadows lengthened across Copley Square, Rick spotted Lily sitting by the fountain, her backpack beside her. He sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. I saw them yesterday, Rick said without preamble. Lily nodded. They didn't see me. I'm good at being invisible when I need to be. A useful skill, Rick acknowledged. Lily, I need to ask you something important. Have you told anyone else about what you've seen? No. She fidgeted with her backpack strap. But that man, Tom, he saw me watching once. He followed me for a block afterward. I didn't like the way he looked at me. Rick felt a chill of concern. When was this? Last week. I ran into a store and lost him, but... She hesitated. Yesterday I saw someone taking pictures of me near my school, an older man in a black car. Rick's protective instincts flared immediately. Lily, I think you might be in danger. These people, they're involved in something very complicated and potentially harmful. I don't want you caught in the middle. I already am, she said with surprising maturity. But I'm not scared. My mum says sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy. Rick studied her determined young face and made a decision. How would you feel about helping me a little more? But only if we can make sure you're safe. The sleek conference room on the 32nd floor of the Hartwell Investments building offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, but Rick barely noticed the sailboats gliding across the water as he faced Thomas Blackwood across the polished mahogany table. He'd spent the morning in this scheduled quarterly review meeting, pretending everything was normal, while studying the man he'd trusted for 15 years. Tom looked exactly as he always had, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his Harvard MBA prominently displayed on the wall behind him. His manner was the same blend of professional and familiar that had characterized their friendship since Rick had hired him away from a competing firm all those years ago. The sustainability portfolio is outperforming our projections by 12%, Tom was saying, sliding a report across the table. The Swiss group is particularly impressed with our green energy acquisitions. Rick nodded, maintaining his practiced expression of interest while inwardly dissecting every word for double meanings. And they're still pushing for that meeting next week? Absolutely, they're eager to finalize terms. Tom's steel blue eyes revealed nothing beyond professional enthusiasm. It's the opportunity we've been working toward, Rick. Hartwell Investments goes truly global with this partnership. Partnership. The word hung in the air between them, its meaning corrupted by what Rick now knew. You've always had vision, Tom, Rick said, watching carefully for any reaction. I wouldn't be where I am without you. Something flickered briefly in Tom's eyes. Satisfaction. Guilt. It was gone too quickly to interpret. We've built something exceptional together, Tom replied smoothly. This next step will secure your legacy. My legacy, Rick thought bitterly. A legacy of being systematically betrayed and removed from my own company. After the meeting concluded, Rick retreated to his private office and locked the door. He'd installed a small device under his desk the previous evening, a voice-activated recorder that had captured the entire meeting. It wasn't about gathering evidence of the conspiracy anymore. He had plenty. It was about understanding Tom's methods, his patterns of manipulation. Rick plugged in earbuds and replayed specific segments, noting how Tom subtly emphasized the urgency of the Swiss deal, how he referenced Rick's recent distraction as justification for handling more negotiations himself. The groundwork for questioning Rick's competence was being carefully laid, brick by calculated brick. His private phone vibrated with a text message from Lily. Man in black car outside school again today, license plate RXG 4723. Rick immediately searched the plate number in the Massachusetts Registry database that Hartwell Investments had access to for background checks. The car was registered to Executive Security Services, a firm that Tom had occasionally used for corporate events. The confirmation that Tom was having Lily surveilled sent a wave of protective anger through Rick. He texted back, "Stay inside. School building. I'll send someone trustworthy to pick you up." Within minutes, Rick had arranged for Marcus Reynolds, his personal attorney, and one of the few people he still trusted implicitly, to collect Lily from her school and bring her to a secure location, Marcus's sister's house in Cambridge. Rick had already spoken with Lily's mother, Sarah Parker, explaining that her daughter had witnessed something sensitive and needed temporary protection. Though initially alarmed, Sarah had agreed to the arrangement after speaking with Marcus directly and receiving assurance that Lily would be safe and could continue her schoolwork remotely. With Lily secured, Rick turned his attention back to the conspiracy unfolding around him. The meeting with the estate attorney was scheduled for tomorrow morning, the trap where he was expected to sign over power of attorney to Vanessa. He needed to appear compliant while gathering more information. That evening, Rick arrived home to find Vanessa hosting a small dinner party, something she hadn't mentioned to him. The guests included two elegantly dressed couples he vaguely recognized from Boston's social circuit and, to his carefully concealed surprise, Tom and his wife. "Eleanor, darling," Vanessa exclaimed, kissing his cheek as he entered. "I wanted to surprise you. You've been working so hard lately, I thought a casual dinner with friends would be nice." Rick smiled, slipping into the role of grateful husband. "How thoughtful." Throughout dinner, Rick observed the dynamic between Tom and Vanessa. To the casual observer, they maintained appropriate social distance. Tom attentive to Eleanor, Vanessa playing the perfect hostess, but Rick caught the subtle exchanges now. A glance held too long, fingers that brushed unnecessarily when passing the salt. The slight tension in Eleanor's posture that suggested she wasn't entirely oblivious to the undercurrents. The conversation turned to the upcoming charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital, where Hartwell Investments was a major donor. "Richard has been so distracted lately," Vanessa said, her tone light but her words deliberate. "I've practically had to manage all the foundation commitments myself." One of the guests, a neurosurgeon named Dr. Phillips, looked at Rick with professional interest. "Stress can do that. The executive brain is particularly vulnerable to cognitive overload. Richard sometimes forgets entire conversations we've had," Vanessa added with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't you, darling?" Rick recognized the performance for what it was, establishing a public narrative of his supposed cognitive decline. He smiled self-deprecatingly. "The price of success, I suppose. Too many details to keep track of." "That's why you have us," Tom interjected smoothly. "Vanessa to manage your life, me to manage your business." "I'm very fortunate," Rick agreed, raising his glass in a toast that allowed him to mask the cold fury in his eyes. After the guests departed, Vanessa busied herself directing the housekeeping staff with cleanup. Rick retreated to his study, ostensibly to check emails, but actually to review the dinner conversation he'd covertly recorded on his phone. The recording confirmed what he'd observed, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to plant seeds of doubt about his mental acuity among Boston's social elite. Dr. Phillips, he suspected, hadn't been invited by accident. The man likely had connections at the hospitals, where Tom and Vanessa planned to have Rick evaluated and potentially confined. A soft knock at his study door interrupted his thoughts. Vanessa entered, looking exquisite in her evening dress, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. For a moment, Rick was struck by the painful contrast between her external beauty and the ugliness of her intentions. "Did you enjoy the evening?" she asked, perching on the edge of his desk. "Very much," he lied, "though a little warning might have been nice. Spontaneity keeps a marriage exciting," she replied, trailing her fingers along his shoulder. "Speaking of which, I've been thinking about a weekend getaway. After we meet with the attorney tomorrow, perhaps we could fly to the vineyard. The summer crowds are gone and you've been working too hard. Martha's Vineyard, isolated, away from business contacts and potential allies." Rick recognized another strategic move. "That sounds perfect," he said, squeezing her hand. "I could use the break." Later, as Vanessa slept beside him, Rick stared At the ceiling, mentally reviewing the evidence he'd accumulated, the fraudulent medical evaluations, the corporate documents being prepared to remove him from leadership, the communications with the fake Swiss investors, the surveillance of Lily. Each piece confirmed the elaborate conspiracy, but something still nagged at him, the beginning. When had it all started? The next morning, while Vanessa was in the shower, Rick accessed her laptop again. This time, he searched deeper, looking for the earliest communications between her and Tom. He found what he was seeking in an archived email folder, messages dating back 6 years, predating his relationship with Vanessa. The initial exchanges were professional, Tom acting as a talent scout for a charity event where Hartwell Investments was the primary sponsor. Vanessa had been struggling then, her acting career failing to launch despite her beauty and ambition. The emails grew more personal over time, eventually revealing a calculated plan. Tom would introduce Vanessa to Rick, facilitating a romantic connection that could be exploited later. Tom had written, "He's vulnerable since the divorce, lonely. Your background in theater makes you perfect for this role. Once you're established in his life, we can move forward with the larger plan." Rick felt physically ill reading the exchanges. His entire marriage, every kiss, every intimate moment, every whispered expression of love, had been part of an elaborate performance. The woman he'd believed loved him had been playing a character, delivering lines written for a long con. The most recent emails confirmed what he'd already pieced together, the plan to have him declared mentally incompetent, transfer his assets to Vanessa through the power of attorney, and sell controlling interest in Hartwell Investments to the fictitious Swiss group, actually shell companies controlled by Tom. With trembling hands, Rick forwarded the most damning emails to his secure account, then carefully erased all evidence of his search from the laptop. He had just closed it when Vanessa emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel. "Ready for our meeting?" she asked, her smile revealing nothing of her true intentions. "Absolutely," Rick replied, his performance now matching hers in its deception. "I think it's important to get our affairs in order." The estate attorney's office was located in a historic building in downtown Boston. As they sat in the tastefully appointed conference room, Rick listened to the attorney explain the power of attorney document with half an ear, his attention focused on Vanessa's subtle cues of impatience, the slight tapping of her finger against her thigh, the too bright smile that appeared whenever the attorney looked her way. When the moment came to sign, Rick hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. "I'm just wondering if we should include some additional oversight," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps name Tom as a co-agent, given his financial expertise." Vanessa's smile faltered momentarily. "I don't think that's necessary, darling. It would just complicate things if decisions needed to be made quickly." "Of course," Rick agreed, signing the document with a flourish, but with a subtle alteration to his signature that would later allow him to challenge its authenticity if needed. It was a trick he'd learned early in his legal career before transitioning to finance. As they left the attorney's office, Vanessa squeezed his arm. "I'm so glad that's done. Now we can truly relax this weekend." "I'm looking forward to it," Rick lied, already planning his next move in a game where the stakes included not just his fortune and company, but potentially his freedom and Lily's safety. Back at his office, Rick locked his door and called Marcus Reynolds, who was currently monitoring Lily's security in Cambridge. "What did you find?" Rick asked without preamble. "It's worse than we thought," Marcus replied gravely. "The medical documents are extensive. Fabricated histories of erratic behavior, supposed episodes of memory loss, even incidents of aggression that never happened. They've created a paper trail going back almost 2 years, and the corporate side. The Swiss investors are a front. The money leads back to offshore accounts with connections to shell companies where Thomas Blackwood is listed as the beneficial owner. They're not just trying to control the company, Rick. They're trying to steal it entirely." Rick closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. "And Lily. She's safe for now, but the surveillance hasn't stopped. Whoever Tom hired is persistent. The girl's smart, though. She noticed the tail before most adults would have." "Keep her close," Rick instructed. "I'm moving forward with the plan tomorrow." After ending the call, Rick opened his desk drawer and removed a small framed photograph. Himself. And Tom at the company's 10th anniversary celebration, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like brothers who'd conquered the world together. He studied Tom's face, searching for some hint of the deception that had apparently been present all along. Finding none, he placed the photograph face down in the drawer and turned to his computer. It was time to spring a trap of his own. Why? First light of dawn was breaking over Boston Harbor as Rick finalized his strategy in the solitude of his home office. Vanessa had left an hour earlier, ostensibly for a charity breakfast, though Rick had confirmed through discreet surveillance that she was meeting Tom at his Beacon Hill apartment. Eleanor, Tom's wife, was conveniently out of town visiting their daughter in Chicago. Rick spread his accumulated evidence across the antique desk that had once belonged to his father. Documents, recordings, photographs, and digital files, each piece a testament to the elaborate betrayal orchestrated by the two people he had trusted most. Now it was time to move from defense to offense. His first call was to Joanna Chen, head of Hartwell Investments' cybersecurity division. "I need absolute discretion on this, Joanna," Rick explained after outlining what he needed. "No one can know, especially Tom or anyone who reports directly to him." "Understood, Mr. Hartwell," Joanna replied professionally, though he could hear the concern in her voice. "I can implement these security protocols immediately. The system records will show routine maintenance only." His next call was to William Porter, a former FBI forensic accountant who now worked as a consultant for Hartwell's compliance department. Rick had personally recruited him 2 years earlier, which meant his loyalty wasn't compromised by long-standing ties to Tom. "Bill, I need a complete audit of all proposed transactions with the Swiss consortium, backdated 18 months. I need to know every document that's been generated, who accessed it, and any discrepancies with standard protocols." "That's a massive undertaking, Rick," Porter responded cautiously. "May I ask why?" "You may not," Rick said firmly. "But I can tell you that the future of Hartwell Investments depends on absolute secrecy and urgency." After securing Porter's cooperation, Rick contacted the final piece of his defensive perimeter, Diana Rawlins, the board's secretary and the most meticulous record-keeper he'd ever known. Diana had been with Hartwell since before Tom joined the company, and her institutional knowledge was unparalleled. "Diana, I need copies of all board minutes where Thomas Blackwood has presented on the European expansion plans, and I need them without anyone knowing you've accessed them." "Is everything all right, Mr. Hartwell?" Diana asked, her voice laced with the maternal concern she'd always shown him. "It will be," Rick assured her. "But time is of the essence." With these pieces in motion, Rick turned his attention to Lily's situation. Marcus had confirmed that the surveillance of the girl had intensified, 2 men now, rotating shifts in unmarked vehicles near her school and her mother's apartment. The threat was escalating, which meant Rick needed to accelerate his protective measures as well. He texted Marcus, "Proceed with Phase 2 for Lily and Sarah." Phase 2 involved relocating both Lily and her mother to a Hartwell-owned property in New Hampshire, a secluded lakeside retreat normally reserved for executive retreats. Sarah Parker had initially resisted, unwilling to leave her multiple jobs, but when Marcus had shown her photographic evidence of the men watching her daughter, her maternal instincts had overridden all other concerns. Rick's phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Breakfast running long. Meeting you directly at airport at 2 p.m. for vineyard trip. Pack casual only." He texted back a simple acknowledgement, knowing he had no intention of making that flight. Instead, he had a different journey planned, one that would take him into the heart of the conspiracy against him. At 11 o'clock, Rick walked into the exclusive Hampshire House Club near the public garden, where he knew Tom conducted his most sensitive business meetings. Using his own membership, Rick gained access to the private dining room adjacent to the one Tom had reserved for a noon appointment. Rick had arranged for the wall between the rooms to be subtly modified the previous night, a task accomplished by a discreet security firm that specialized in corporate counterintelligence. A nearly invisible microphone now transmitted directly to Rick's phone, while a tiny camera, provided visual access through an inconspicuous app disguised as a newsreader. At precisely noon, Rick watched through the digital window as Tom entered the private dining room, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, whom Rick recognized as Dr. Gerald Swanson, Chief of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital and a prominent figure in Boston's medical community. "Thank you for meeting on such short notice, Gerald," Tom said as they settled into their seats. "The situation has become more urgent than anticipated." Dr. Swanson nodded gravely. "I've reviewed the file you sent. If the behavioral patterns are as documented, I agree that intervention may be necessary." "They are," Tom confirmed. "Increasingly erratic decision-making, memory lapses, occasional paranoia. His wife has documented numerous instances." "And you're certain this isn't simply stress? Running a company of Hartwell's size comes with enormous pressure." Tom leaned forward, his expression a perfect mask of concern. "I've known Rick for 15 years. This is different. The last board meeting, he forgot discussions we'd had just days before. He's making impulsive decisions about major investments without proper analysis. Just between us, several board members have expressed serious concerns." Dr. Swanson sighed. "Well, the documentation certainly supports a psychological evaluation, but you understand that involuntary commitment is an extreme measure, Thomas. It requires substantial evidence of potential self-harm or inability to care for oneself, which is why we've been so thorough in building the case," Tom replied smoothly. "His wife is prepared to sign the necessary papers. As his oldest friend and business partner, I'll provide supporting testimony, and of course, your professional assessment will be crucial." "When are you thinking of proceeding?" "Monday morning," Tom said decisively. "Vanessa is taking him to Martha's Vineyard this weekend to keep him relaxed and isolated. The transfer to the facility should happen immediately upon their return to Boston." Rick felt his blood run cold, despite having suspected this very plan. Hearing it articulated so clinically, his freedom discussed as a mere logistical detail, brought home the ruthlessness of what he was facing. "And the business transition?" Dr. Swanson asked, confirming Rick's suspicion that the doctor was not merely a medical professional, but a knowing participant in the scheme. "The SAO emergency board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday morning, with Rick certified as temporarily incapacitated, and with Vanessa holding his power of attorney. We'll have the authority to proceed with the European transaction. By the time any legal challenges could be mounted, the company structure will be irreversibly altered." "And your personal compensation for this assistance?" the doctor inquired delicately. Tom smiled. "Your new psychiatric wing will receive its full funding, Gerald. 20 million as discussed. A fitting legacy for a physician of your stature." As the conversation continued into specific details of the psychiatric evaluation and commitment procedures, Rick fought to maintain his composure. The depth of the conspiracy exceeded even his worst suspicions. Not just his company and marriage, but his very freedom was at stake, all orchestrated by a man he had considered family. When the meeting concluded, Rick slipped out of the club through a service entrance, unwilling to risk an accidental encounter with Tom. Back in his car, he called Marcus Reynolds. "It's happening faster than we anticipated," Rick said without preamble. "They're planning to have me committed on Monday." "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "That's less than 72 hours. Which means we accelerate everything. Is Lily secure?" "Yes. She and her mother arrived at the lake house an hour ago. My sister is with them, and I have 2 security professionals on the property." "Good, and the legal documentation?" "Ready for your signature. I've prepared counterfilings that can be submitted the moment they make their move." Rick nodded, though Marcus couldn't see him. "And what about the recording system for tomorrow's meeting?" "State of the art," Marcus assured him. "Every word will be captured with crystal clarity." "Excellent." Rick paused, considering his next words carefully. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. If this goes wrong, if they somehow manage to get me into that facility, you need to move immediately. Every piece of evidence we've gathered goes to the district attorney, the SEC, and the board simultaneously." "It won't come to that," Marcus said firmly. "We're ahead of them now. Nevertheless, be prepared." Rick ended the call and sat motionless in his parked car, watching Boston's financial district through the windshield. The gleaming Hartwell Investments Tower dominated the skyline, a monument to 20 years of his life's work, now the prize in a game of betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Safe at the lake house, lots of trees. Mom seems less worried here." The simple message centered him, reminding him of what truly mattered beyond the corporate machinations. He texted back, "Glad you're comfortable. Stay alert but try to enjoy the peace." Rick's next stop was Joanna Chen's secure office in the basement of the Hartwell building. Unlike the executive floors with their sweeping views and luxurious appointments, the cybersecurity division operated in a deliberately nondescript space with restricted access. "What have you found?" Rick asked as Joanna led him to a private conference room. She placed a laptop before him and pulled up a series of documents. "The electronic trail is comprehensive, Mr. Hartwell. Mr. Blackwood has been systematically creating a shadow corporate structure for nearly 3 years. 3 years, Rick repeated, stunned by the timeline. That predated even his first meeting with Vanessa. Yes, the earliest documents suggest he began exploring the possibility of gaining controlling interest shortly after you divorced your first wife." Joanna's expression remained professional, but her eyes conveyed her personal dismay at the betrayal. "He appears to have recognized your emotional vulnerability as an opportunity." "And Vanessa's involvement?" "Began approximately 6 months before you met her. There are emails, encrypted, but we managed to recover them, where he specifically recruits her for her acting abilities and, forgive me, her physical attributes that he believed would appeal to you." Rick nodded grimly. "Show me everything." For the next 2 hours, Rick immersed himself in the digital evidence of his own exploitation. Email exchanges between Tom and Vanessa discussing his habits and preferences, psychological profiles created to help Vanessa present herself as his perfect match, financial arrangements promising her a percentage of the company's value once the takeover was complete. Most disturbing were the communications regarding his planned psychiatric confinement, detailed discussions of which medications would most effectively render him compliant and confused, which doctors could be bought or manipulated, and how to ensure his isolation from potential allies. "They've thought of everything," Rick murmured, scrolling through a document outlining the legal strategy for maintaining control once he was institutionalized. "Not everything," Joanna corrected, her voice quiet but firm. "They didn't account for Lily Parker, or for you discovering their plan before it was fully implemented." Rick looked up, struck by the simple truth of her observation. For all their meticulous planning, Tom and Vanessa had failed to anticipate the random element. A street-smart young girl with an unflinching moral compass. "You're right," he acknowledged, "and that's their fatal mistake." As evening fell over Boston, Rick made his final preparations. He sent Vanessa a text explaining that he had to handle an unexpected situation at the office, but would meet her at the Vineyard House the following day. Her response came quickly, concern tinged with barely concealed annoyance at the disruption to their plans. In his office, Rick gathered the key pieces of physical evidence he'd accumulated and secured them in a safe deposit box at a bank, where neither Tom nor Vanessa had connections. Digital backups were stored on encrypted drives held by 3 separate trusted individuals, with instructions to release the information if Rick became suddenly unreachable. As midnight approached, Rick stood at his office window overlooking the city lights of Boston. In less than 12 hours he would face Tom and Vanessa together, allowing them to believe their plan was proceeding perfectly. It would be the performance of his lifetime, pretending ignorance while leading them into a trap of his own design. His phone buzzed with a final text for the night. From Lily. "Mr. Reynolds showed me how to fish today. I caught a bass. First time I've ever been fishing." The simple message brought an unexpected smile to Rick's face. Amid the betrayal and corporate intrigue, this child's experience offered a reminder of what normal human connection looked like, authentic, uncalculated, free from hidden agendas. "Well done," he texted back. "Save some fish for me. I might need fishing lessons myself soon." Tomorrow would bring confrontation and danger, but tonight Rick allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the conspiracy, One that might include teaching a brave young girl how to navigate not just a fishing boat, but a world that had shown her its harshest realities far too early. The morning sun cast long shadows across Boston Common as Rick walked briskly toward the Four Seasons Hotel. He had chosen this venue carefully for his confrontation with Tom, neutral, ground with excellent security, and most importantly, multiple recording systems that Marcus had arranged to access. In his briefcase, Rick carried what appeared to be the transfer documents for the Swiss consortium deal. What Tom didn't know was that Rick had modified the documents subtly, inserting clauses that would trigger regulatory reviews and mandatory disclosure requirements, fail-safes in case things didn't go according to plan. As he approached the hotel's private meeting rooms, Rick touched the small device in his ear, a virtually invisible communication link to Marcus, who was monitoring from a suite 2 floors above. "All systems operational," Marcus's voice confirmed softly. "Every word will be recorded with crystal clarity." Rick nodded slightly, knowing the motion-activated camera in the corridor would capture the gesture. Then he straightened his tie, assumed the slightly harried expression of a busy executive, and entered the meeting room. Tom was already there reviewing documents at the conference table. He looked up with a smile that, to anyone else, would have appeared genuinely warm. "Rick, you're early. Good to see Martha's Vineyard hasn't made. You completely abandon your punctuality." "Change plans," Rick replied, setting his briefcase on the table. "I decided to handle this meeting before heading out. Vanessa's already at the house." Tom's expression flickered momentarily, a microsecond of recalculation that Rick would have missed if he hadn't been watching for it. "She didn't mention that when we spoke this morning." "Last-minute decision," Rick said casually. "You know how it is. Wanted to get the business squared away so I could actually relax this weekend." Tom nodded, recovering smoothly. "Smart thinking. The Swiss are anxious to move forward, and I've assured them you're fully on board." Rick allowed himself a small smile. "Well, I've had some thoughts on the structure, made a few adjustments. To the paperwork." Alarm flashed briefly in Tom's eyes. "Adjustments? Rick, we've spent months negotiating these terms. Changes at this stage could jeopardize the entire deal." "Nothing major," Rick assured him, removing the modified documents from, his briefcase. "Just some additional protections for our existing shareholders. Standard governance provisions." As Tom began reviewing the documents with growing concern, the meeting room door opened again. Both men looked up to see Vanessa enter, elegantly dressed in a designer suit that Rick recognized as new, likely purchased with his money for this very occasion. "Surprise," she said, her smile perfectly calibrated between warmth and apology. "I hope you don't mind me joining, darling. I was so curious about this Swiss deal you've been working on, and since our flight got delayed anyway." Rick allowed, genuine surprise to show on his face. This wasn't part of the plan. Vanessa was supposed to be at Martha's Vineyard, maintaining the pretense of their weekend getaway. Her presence now suggested an acceleration of their timeline, or, worse, that they suspected his knowledge. "Of course not," he recovered quickly. "Though I thought you'd be enjoying the beach by now." "Mechanical issues with the charter plane," she explained smoothly. "They're sending another, but not until this afternoon." She moved to Tom's side of the table with practiced casualness. "So how are things progressing?" Tom gave her a warning glance that Rick pretended not to notice. "We were just discussing some last-minute changes Rick wants to make to the agreement." Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand came to rest on Rick's shoulder. "Oh, darling, is that really necessary? Tom has worked so hard to get everything perfectly arranged. Wouldn't it be better to proceed as planned?" The double meaning in her words wasn't lost on Rick. He covered her hand with his own, feeling a chill at the touch that had once brought him comfort. "Sometimes plans need adjustment, sweetheart. It's just business." "Speaking of adjustments," Tom interjected, closing the folder with the modified documents, "I think we should discuss this privately first, Rick, before involving the Swiss team." "They're waiting in the adjacent room," Vanessa added. "It would be awkward to keep them waiting much longer." Rick nodded thoughtfully, realizing the trap was being sprung earlier than anticipated. The Swiss investors, actually actors hired by Tom, were present to witness his supposed mental instability. The confrontation he had planned would need to happen now, not after gathering more evidence as he'd hoped. "Before we bring them in," Rick said carefully, "I'd like to understand something, Tom. The offshore accounts linked to the shell companies are in the Cayman Islands. Are those part of the Swiss consortium's standard operating procedure?" Tom froze imperceptibly, his easy smile faltering for just a moment. "What offshore accounts?" "The ones you've been setting up for the past 3 years," Rick continued conversationally, removing a flash drive from his pocket and placing it on the table. "The ones that trace back to you as the beneficial owner, not any European investment group." Vanessa's hand tightened painfully on Rick's shoulder. "Richard, what are you talking about? You're not making sense." "I think I'm making perfect sense," Rick countered, standing to remove himself from her grip. "Just like the medical evaluations. Make sense. The ones with my name on them that I never underwent. Or the psychiatric facility that's expecting to admit me on Monday morning." The color drained from Tom's face. "Rick, listen to yourself. This is exactly the kind of paranoid ideation that's been concerning us." "Us?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "You and my wife, you mean? Or you and your psychiatric consultant, Dr. Swanson? The one you're paying $20 million for a new hospital wing in exchange for helping to have me committed." Vanessa moved swiftly to stand beside Tom, their united front now openly displayed. "Richard, you need help. We've been trying to handle this privately to protect you and the company, but—" "Save it," Rick cut her off. "The performance was masterful, Vanessa, almost as impressive as your work in Stardust. Though that film at least had the virtue of being openly fictional." Tom recovered his composure, his expression hardening into something Rick had never seen before. The true face behind the 15-year mask of friendship. "You've clearly been working too hard, Rick. Imagining conspiracies, making wild accusations. This is exactly why Vanessa and I have been concerned." "Concerned enough to hire men to follow a 12-year-old girl?" Rick asked quietly. "To threaten a child who simply returned a watch you planted, Tom, as the first step in making me question my own perceptions." Vanessa laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "A street urchin? That's your source for these delusions? Richard, listen to yourself." "I have been listening," Rick replied evenly. "I've also been watching and recording." He gestured to the ceiling, where a small camera was barely visible in the recessed lighting. "Everything in this room is being documented, as was your meeting with Dr. Swanson yesterday, Tom. Fascinating discussion about my involuntary commitment and the $20 million payment for his cooperation." Tom's expression darkened dangerously. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Rick activated his phone and Tom's voice filled the room. "Vanessa is taking him to Martha's Vineyard this weekend to keep him relaxed and isolated. The transfer to the facility should happen immediately upon their return to Boston." The recording continued, capturing the details of the planned commitment and the subsequent corporate takeover. Vanessa's face transformed from concerned spouse to cold calculation as she realized their scheme was exposed. "Turn it off," Tom demanded, his voice low and threatening. Rick complied, but kept his phone in hand. "That's just a sample. I have everything. The emails between you two dating back 6 years, the falsified medical records, the offshore accounts, the communications about hiring Vanessa to seduce me as part of your long-term strategy. Everything." Silence filled the room, heavy with the weight of exposed deception. Then Tom smiled, a cold, confident expression that sent a chill down Rick's spine. "Impressive detective work, Rick. Truly. But ultimately, futile." He gestured toward the door. "You seem to forget who's waiting in the next room. 3 prominent physicians, including a neuropsychiatrist who's prepared to evaluate you right now and sign emergency commitment papers based on your clearly paranoid behavior. Plus, the board has already been briefed on concerns about your mental state," Vanessa added, her actress's mask completely discarded now. "Your erratic accusations will only confirm what they've been told to expect." Rick maintained his calm, though inwardly he recognized the dangerous precipice on which he stood. They were right. If he were forcibly committed, even temporarily, the narrative of his mental instability would be established. His evidence might be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. You've overlooked something important, Rick said quietly. Oh? Tom raised an eyebrow. And what's that? The fact that I'm not the only one with this information. Rick glanced at his watch. Right about now, William Porter from our compliance department is briefing the SEC on the fraudulent Swiss transaction. Joanna Chen from Cybersecurity is providing the FBI with evidence of wire fraud and conspiracy. And Marcus Reynolds is filing for emergency protective orders, not for me but for Lily Parker, the child your men have been threatening. Vanessa scoffed. No one will believe a street kid over us. They might not, Rick acknowledged, but they'll believe the recordings your surveillance team made of her. Interesting thing about modern technology. When you put a tracker on someone's phone, it goes both ways if you know what you're doing. My security team has been monitoring your monitors, collecting every image, every conversation, every threat. Tom's confidence began to crack visibly. You're overplaying your hand, Rick. Even if you have some evidence, we have the advantage of position and preparation. One call from me, and the board convenes an emergency session to remove you. You're welcome to try, Rick replied. But after I informed keyboard members about the actual structure of the Swiss deal, how it funnels company assets into your personal accounts, they might have questions for you first. The door to the meeting room opened, revealing Marcus. Reynolds, with a distinguished older man Rick recognized as Judge William Hargrove of the Massachusetts Superior Court. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Hartwell, Judge Hargrove said formally. I've reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Reynolds and found sufficient cause to issue temporary restraining orders against both of you, prohibiting any contact with Richard Hartwell or Lily Parker, pending full investigation of these serious allegations. Two uniformed court officers entered behind the judge, carrying the official documents. Tom's face contorted with rage as he was served with the restraining order. This is absurd. Rick, whatever you think you're doing. What I'm doing, Rick interrupted calmly, is protecting what's mine. My company, my reputation, and a child who had the courage to tell the truth when everyone around me was lying. Vanessa's cold composure finally shattered. You can't possibly think you'll win this. Do you know how long we've been planning? How carefully we've constructed every detail? One restraining order doesn't undo years of groundwork. No, Ricky. Agreed. But it's a start. As the court officers escorted Tom and Vanessa from the room, Rick felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication tinged with profound sadness at the depth of betrayal, relief undermined by the knowledge that the battle was far from over. Marcus approached, placing a supportive hand on Rick's shoulder. The first phase worked perfectly. The judge was convinced by the evidence, particularly the recordings of the threats against Lily. But Tom's right about one thing. This isn't over. They'll fight back with everything they have. Let them, Rick said, gathering his documents. We have the truth on our side. And the element of surprise, Marcus added. They never expected you to discover their plan, much less counter it so effectively. Rick nodded thoughtfully. We have Lily to thank for that. Without her, I might have walked right into their trap. Judge Hargrove approached, his expression grave. Mr. Hartwell, I've reviewed the psychiatric documentation they prepared. It's disturbingly comprehensive, falsified records dating back nearly 2 years, statements from bought medical professionals, even manipulated security footage from your office showing supposed erratic behavior. All fabricated, Rick confirmed. Clearly, the judge agreed, but convincingly so. Had they succeeded in having you committed even briefly, the legal presumption of incapacity would have been difficult to overcome, especially with your wife and business partner both supporting the narrative. Rick felt a chill at how close he had come to losing everything. What happens now? The restraining orders buy us time, Marcus explained, but we need to move quickly to secure the company. Tom still has allies on the board and within the executive team. Rick nodded decisively. Then let's not waste a moment. Judge, thank you for your assistance today, Marcus. Call William Porter and have him meet us at the office immediately. We need to lock down all accounts and secure the digital infrastructure before Tom can activate any contingency plans. As they prepared to leave, Rick's phone buzzed with a text message from Lily. Mr. Reynolds says everything went okay. Caught another fish. When are you coming to see it? The simple message brought a smile to Rick's face amid the tension. He typed back, "Soon. Keep practicing. You're going to have to teach me." Looking up at Marcus and the judge, Rick felt his resolve strengthen. "Gentlemen, this isn't just about saving a company anymore. It's about justice and protecting those who can't protect themselves." With renewed determination, Rick Hartwell stepped out of the meeting room, leaving behind the shattered remains of his marriage and longest friendship, but moving forward toward a truth that had been obscured for far too long. The battle had just begun, but for the first time in weeks, the path ahead was clear. The following 48 hours transformed Hartwell Investments into a corporate battlefield. Rick established a command center in a secure conference room, working with a core team of trusted executives to counter the aftershocks of Tom's betrayal. Security protocols were overhauled, financial controls tightened, and emergency board communications issued to prevent panic among shareholders. "The Swiss group is demanding answers," Joanna Chen reported, reviewing the latest communications. "They're threatening legal action over the collapsed deal." Rick smiled grimly. "Let them. Once they realize there's no actual consortium, just shell companies controlled by Tom, those threats will evaporate." William Porter nodded in agreement. "The SEC is already investigating the offshore accounts. The paper trail is damning, Rick. Tom didn't just plan to take over the company. He was systematically siphoning funds for at least 18 months. The revelation stung despite everything Rick had already discovered. While he had been trusting Tom with the company's future, his supposed friend had been actively stealing from him. "What about the board?" Rick asked, turning to Marcus. "Split," Marcus admitted. "Most are shocked by the evidence and firmly in your corner. But 3 members, Phillips, Delaney, and Westover, are still parroting Tom's claims about your mental state. They're demanding an independent psychiatric evaluation." Rick frowned. Not surprising, Tom cultivated those relationships carefully. All 3 were appointed on his recommendation. "We can fight it," Marcus suggested. "The restraining order provides some protection." "No," Rick interrupted decisively. "I'll take the evaluation. From a truly independent specialist with no connections to Tom or Massachusetts General, I have nothing to hide." Diana Rawlins, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with concern. "Is that wise, Mr. Hartwell? Even with an independent doctor, they'll be looking for any sign of instability." "Which they won't find," Rick assured her. "What they will find is a CEO who uncovered a massive conspiracy and responded with methodical precision rather than panic. That's not instability, that's leadership." The meeting continued into the evening, with Rick's team working tirelessly to secure the company while gathering additional evidence against Tom and Vanessa. Around midnight, when most had finally departed for a few hours of rest, Rick found himself alone in the conference room, staring at the Boston skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. "Richard Hartwell," he answered cautiously. "Rick, it's Eleanor Blackwood, Tom's wife." Rick straightened in his chair. "Eleanor, this is unexpected." "I imagine so." Her voice was strained but composed. "I need to see you, in person. I have information you should know." Rick hesitated. Eleanor had always been pleasant during their social interactions, but she was still Tom's wife of 30 years. "I'm not sure that's a good idea right now." "I understand your caution," she replied, "but I assure you I'm not acting on Tom's behalf. Quite the opposite." She paused. "I've known about Vanessa for years, Rick, and there's more. Things that explain how all this began. Things you deserve to know." After a moment's consideration, Rick agreed to meet her at a neutral location, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, during its morning opening hours. Public enough to be safe, quiet enough for a private conversation. The next morning, Rick spotted Eleanor seated on a bench in the museum's stunning courtyard garden. At 62, she remained an elegant woman, her silver hair swept into a classic chignon, her posture perfect, despite the evident strain in her expression. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat beside her, leaving appropriate distance between them. "Your call intrigued me," Rick admitted, "though I'm not sure what you could tell me that would change anything at this point." Eleanor gazed at the flowers surrounding the courtyard. Did you know that Tom and I were having problems long before you met Vanessa? That we'd been essentially living separate lives for nearly a decade?" Rick shook his head. Tom never mentioned any marital difficulties. "No, he wouldn't have," Eleanor said with a sad smile. "Appearance has always been everything to Thomas. The perfect marriage, the perfect career, the perfect life, regardless of the reality beneath the surface." She opened her handbag and removed a small flash drive. "3 years ago, I hired a private investigator because I suspected Thomas was having an affair. What I discovered was far more disturbing. Detailed plans to gradually take control of Hartwell Investments, starting with isolating you personally." Rick accepted the flash drive, turning it over in his fingers. "Why didn't you say anything?" "At first, I confronted him privately. He convinced me it was merely contingency planning, protecting the company in case your personal problems ever affected your judgment." Eleanor's mouth tightened. I wanted to believe him. By the time I realized the full extent of his intentions, he had leverage over me. What kind of leverage? Financial manipulation. He structured our accounts so that I would appear complicit in certain irregularities. Made sure my name was on documents I never actually signed. She met Rick's gaze directly. "I'm not proud of my silence, but I was trapped in my own way." Rick studied her face, seeing the toll that years of deception had taken. "And Vanessa? When did she enter the picture?" "Thomas found her when he was scouting for a charity event. One of those struggling actresses, desperate for any connection to wealth and influence. He recognized her potential immediately. Beautiful, ambitious, and completely amoral." Eleanor's voice hardened. "I watched him groom her for you, Rick, teaching her your preferences, your vulnerabilities. It was like watching a predator train. Another predator." The detailed confirmation of what Rick had already discovered was still painful to hear. "Why come forward now?" "Because of the child," Eleanor said simply. "When I learned they were threatening a young girl." She stopped, composing herself. "There are lines, Rick. Lines that shouldn't be crossed no matter what the stakes." Rick nodded, a new understanding forming between them. "What's on the drive?" "Everything my investigator gathered over 3 years. Communications my lawyer helped me access from our home computers. Records of meetings, financial transfers, the original drafts of the plan before Vanessa was even involved." She gestured to the flash drive. "It won't undo what's happened, but it might help you protect yourself and the child going forward." "Thank you," Rick said sincerely. "This couldn't have been easy." "No," Eleanor agreed, standing to leave, "but it's necessary. One last thing, Rick. Thomas is more dangerous than you know. When his ambitions are threatened, he becomes someone else. Someone I've feared for years. Be careful." After Eleanor departed, Rick remained in the courtyard, contemplating their conversation and the additional pieces it provided to the puzzle. Tom's betrayal hadn't been a sudden opportunity or a recent development. It had been a calculated campaign spanning years, with Rick as the designated target from the beginning. The flash drive proved invaluable. By that afternoon, Rick's security team had verified its contents, adding substantial evidence to their case. Eleanor had provided what they'd been missing, the origin point of the conspiracy and proof of its premeditated nature. As evening approached, Rick received an unexpected call from Sarah Parker, Lily's mother. "Mr. Hartwell, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Miss Parker. Is everything all right at the lake house?" "Yes, we're fine, but—" She hesitated. "Lily's been having nightmares. She keeps worrying about those men finding her again. I've tried to reassure her, but—" "Say no more," Rick interrupted gently. "Would it help if I spoke with her?" "Actually," Sarah said hesitantly, "she's been asking when you're coming to visit. She says she needs to show you how to fish properly." Despite everything, Rick found himself smiling. "Tell her I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. I think I can manage a few hours away from the office." After ending the call, Rick summoned Marcus to his office. "I need to go to the New Hampshire property tomorrow. Can you handle things here?" Marcus looked concerned. "The psychiatric evaluation is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The board insisted it happen before the emergency meeting on Friday." "I know. I'll do the evaluation first thing, then head to New Hampshire afterward. The preliminary hearing for the restraining orders isn't until Monday, so we have time. Are you sure this is wise? The situation is still volatile. Rick's expression hardened. A young girl is having nightmares because of me, Marcus. Because she tried to do the right thing and got caught in this mess. I need to see her, to reassure her personally that she's safe. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. I'll arrange security for the trip, discreet but thorough. The following morning, Rick underwent a 3-hour psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Eliza Thornton, a respected psychiatrist with no connections to Massachusetts General Hospital or Tom's network. Her assessment was unequivocal. Rick Hartwell showed no signs of cognitive impairment, delusional thinking, or psychological instability. If anything, his methodical response to discovering the conspiracy demonstrated exceptional emotional regulation and strategic thinking. With the evaluation complete and a preliminary report promised by the following day, Rick headed north to New Hampshire. The 2-hour drive provided a welcome respite from the intensity of the past week. As Boston's urban landscape gave way to New England's autumn foliage, Rick felt himself relaxing incrementally, the weight on his shoulders lightening with each mile. The Hartwell corporate retreat was nestled on the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee, a sprawling property with a main lodge and several guest cabins spread across 30 wooded acres. As Rick's car approached the main house, he spotted Lily sitting on the dock, fishing rod in hand, her small figure silhouetted against the sparkling water. She turned at the sound of his car and broke into a wide smile that transformed her usually serious face. By the time Rick reached the dock, she was already reeling in her line with practiced efficiency. "You came," she exclaimed, her delight unmistakable. "I promised, didn't I?" Rick replied, surprised by how genuinely pleased he was to see her. "Any luck today?" "3 bass and a sunfish," she reported proudly. "Mom cooked the sunfish for lunch. She's getting really good at it." Rick spotted Sarah watching from the porch of the main lodge, her expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering concern. He waved, and she acknowledged him with a nod before disappearing inside, giving them privacy. "Your mum says you've been having trouble sleeping," Rick said gently, sitting beside Lily on the dock. The girl's smile faded. "Sometimes I dream they've found us, the men in the car." "Those men can't hurt you anymore, Lily. They're being investigated by authorities now." "But what about the lady? Your wife?" Lily asked, her perceptiveness catching Rick off guard. "She looked at me like she hated me." Rick considered how to respond appropriately to a child while still being honest. "Vanessa and Tom did some very wrong things, and now they're facing consequences for their actions. Part of those consequences is that they legally can't come near either of us." Lily nodded, processing this information. "Mr. Reynolds explained about restraining orders. He said it's like a force field in those science fiction movies." Rick smiled at the analogy. "That's a good way to think about it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching. A heron glided across the lake surface before Lily spoke again. "Are you okay, Mr. Hartwell? You found out people you trusted were lying to you. That must hurt a lot." The simple, direct question, asked with such genuine concern, caught Rick by surprise. In the chaos of protecting his company and building a legal case, he'd had little time to process the emotional impact of the betrayal. "It does hurt," he admitted, seeing no reason to shield her from this truth. "When you trust someone completely and then discover it was all fake, it makes you question everything." Lily nodded sagely. "Like when my dad left. Mom said he loved us, but then he just disappeared. I kept wondering what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," Rick assured her firmly. "Sometimes adults make terrible choices that hurt others. That's about them, not about you." "That's what Mom says, too." Lily cast her line back into the water with surprising skill. "Are you going to be sad forever?" The question, in its childlike directness, made Rick pause. "No," he said finally, "not forever. It'll take time, but eventually the hurt will be smaller." "Good," Lily declared, "because you seem like a nice person. You should be happy." Rick felt something shift inside him, a small but significant realignment. This child, who had experienced her own profound disappointments, could still see goodness and possibility in the world. If she could maintain that perspective despite everything, perhaps he could too. "Now," Lily said businesslike, "you need to learn how to fish properly. Mr. Reynolds tries, but he holds the rod all wrong." For the next hour, Rick received detailed instruction from his 12-year-old teacher on proper casting technique, the patience required for successful fishing, and how to recognize the subtle signals of a potential catch. When he finally landed, a modest base under her guidance, Lily's expression of pride was worth more than any corporate victory he'd ever achieved. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah called them in for dinner. The meal was simple but delicious: freshly caught fish, vegetables from a local farm, and warm bread that filled the lodge's kitchen with a comforting aroma. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on Lily's schoolwork, which she was continuing remotely. Sarah's background as a trained nurse, now working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and their life in Dorchester. Rick found himself increasingly impressed by both mother and daughter, their resilience, their clear bond, and their determined optimism despite difficult circumstances. After dinner, as Sarah began clearing the dishes, Rick received an urgent call from Marcus. "We have a situation," Marcus said without preamble. "Tom's attorney filed an emergency motion challenging the restraining order. They're claiming you manipulated evidence and coerced witnesses. The hearing has been moved up to tomorrow morning." Rick sighed, the brief respite from reality ending abruptly. "I'll head back tonight." "There's more," Marcus continued grimly. "They've subpoenaed Lily as a witness. They're claiming she was paid to provide false testimony about the watch incident and the surveillance." Rick felt a surge of protective anger. "She's a child, Marcus. They can't seriously expect—" "They're arguing that she's the linchpin of your case. If they can discredit her, they undermine everything." After ending the call, Rick explained the situation to Sarah as gently as possible. Her face paled with concern for her daughter. "They want to put Lily on the stand? To question her like a criminal? Absolutely not." "I agree," Rick assured her. "My legal team will fight this. But I need to return to Boston tonight to prepare." As they spoke, neither noticed Lily standing in the doorway, having heard everything. "I'll do it," she said firmly, causing both adults to turn in surprise. "I'll tell the judge what I saw. I'm not scared." Sarah moved to her daughter immediately. "Lily, honey, you don't understand what this means. These are powerful people with expensive lawyers. They'll try to confuse you to make you sound like you're lying." "But I'm not lying," Lily insisted. "And I'm smart. I know what I saw." Rick knelt to her level, meeting her determined gaze. "Lily, you've already done more than enough. This isn't your battle to fight." "Yes, it is," she countered with surprising conviction. "You helped us when those men were following me. You got us to this safe place. You believed me when I told you about the watch." She straightened her small shoulders. "Mom always says we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Rick exchanged a glance with Sarah, recognizing the same determination in the daughter that he'd observed in the mother. This wasn't a child who could be easily dissuaded once her mind was made up. If, and only if, the judge allows it, and only with proper protections in place, Rick conceded. "But your mother has the final say." Sarah studied her daughter's resolute expression, then nodded reluctantly. "We'll come back to Boston with you tonight, but I'll be with her every step of the way." As they prepared to leave the peaceful lakeside retreat, Rick found himself admiring Lily's courage, while simultaneously wishing he could shield her from what lay ahead. The legal battle was about to escalate dramatically, with a 12-year-old girl at its center. A development Rick had never anticipated when he first encountered her on a Boston sidewalk just 1 week earlier. Loading their minimal belongings into Rick's car, Lily paused to look back at the lake, now silvered by moonlight. "We'll come back someday, right? When all this is over?" "Absolutely," Rick promised. "There are still plenty of fish I need to learn how to catch." Her smile returned, briefly before being replaced by a more serious expression. "Mr. Hartwell, tomorrow when I have to talk to the judge, I'm not going to mess it up, I promise." Rick felt a sudden tightness in his throat. "I know you won't, Lily, and no matter what happens, you've already shown more courage than most adults I know." As they drove through the gathering darkness toward Boston, Rick mentally prepared for the confrontation to come. Tom and Vanessa were fighting back exactly as expected, using every legal maneuver and dirty trick at their disposal. But in their desperation to discredit Lily, they had made a critical miscalculation. They had underestimated her, just as they had underestimated Rick, and that mistake might prove to be their final undoing. The Suffolk County Courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky as Rick, Sarah, and Lily ascended its granite steps. News of the emergency hearing had somehow leaked to the press, resulting in a small cluster of business reporters and photographers gathered near the entrance. Rick positioned himself protectively between the cameras and Lily, while Marcus used his broad shoulders to create a buffer on the other side. "Remember," Marcus advised quietly as they passed through security, "Judge Hargrove is fair but strict. Tom's attorney will try to paint this as a corporate power struggle, where you manipulated a child for sympathy. Stay calm, stick to facts, and let the evidence speak for itself." Rick nodded, his attention more focused on Lily than on the legal strategy. Despite her brave words the previous night, she looked small and vulnerable in the cavernous courthouse hallway. She had dressed in her best clothes, a simple blue dress that Sarah had hurriedly purchased that morning, her auburn hair, neatly brushed and secured with matching clips. "Are you still sure about this?" Rick asked her gently. Lily's chin lifted with determination. "Yes, Mom says when you know the truth you have to speak it even when people don't want to hear it." Sarah squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "That's right, but remember what we discussed. If you feel scared or confused at any point, you just look at me or Mr. Reynolds and we'll ask for a break." Inside the courtroom, Rick immediately spotted Tom and Vanessa seated at the respondents' table with their attorney, Lawrence Bennett, one of Boston's most aggressive and expensive litigators. Tom was impeccably dressed as always, his expression a practiced mask of righteous concern. Vanessa had adopted a subdued appearance, minimal makeup, conservative clothing, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple style that suggested sincerity rather than glamour. As Rick's group moved toward the petitioner's table, Tom's eyes locked with his momentarily. Rick was struck by what he saw there. Not anger or even defiance, but something colder and more calculated. It was the gaze of a predator assessing prey, utterly devoid of the warmth that had characterized their 15-year friendship. Then, Tom's attention shifted to Lily, and his expression changed subtly. A flicker of surprise, as though he hadn't expected Rick to actually bring the child to court. Beside him, Vanessa's perfect composure slipped momentarily as she stared at Lily with naked hostility, before her attorney murmured something that caused her to quickly rearrange her features into appropriate neutrality. Judge Hargrove entered, and the proceedings began with Bennett immediately challenging the validity of the temporary restraining orders. "Your Honor, these orders were obtained through manipulation and misrepresentation," Bennett argued smoothly. "Mr. Hartwell has manufactured evidence to distract from the legitimate concerns about his mental state raised by his wife and closest business associate. This entire narrative about a conspiracy is itself evidence of paranoid ideation that deserves professional attention," Marcus countered with methodical precision, presenting the psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Thornton alongside the financial evidence of Tom's offshore accounts and the falsified medical documents bearing Rick's name. Judge Hargrove reviewed the materials carefully before addressing Bennett. "Counselor, these documents appear quite convincing. Your clients are alleged to have created fraudulent medical records and diverted corporate funds. How do you respond?" "The financial transactions were authorized contingency planning, Your Honor," Bennett replied without hesitation. "As for the medical documentation, Mrs. Hartwell was gathering information out of genuine concern for her husband's well-being, a concern shared by Mr. Blackwood as his longtime friend and business partner." The judge's expression remained skeptical, and the recorded conversation between Mr. Blackwood and Dr. Swanson discussing Mr. Hartwell's involuntary commitment. "Taken out of context, Your Honor. They were discussing hypothetical scenarios in case Mr. Hartwell's condition deteriorated further." Rick observed the performance with grudging admiration for its audacity. Bennett was attempting to reframe every piece of evidence as an act of concern rather than conspiracy, a strategy that might have worked if not for the overwhelming volume and consistency of the evidence against his clients. "I'd like to hear from Mrs. Hartwell directly," Judge Hargrove decided, gesturing for Vanessa to take the stand. Under oath, Vanessa delivered a masterful performance of the concerned wife, her voice trembling appropriately, tears threatening but never quite falling as she described Rick's supposed behavioral changes and her escalating worry. "I only wanted to help him, Your Honor," she concluded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Everything I did was out of love and fear for his well-being." During cross-examination, Marcus methodically dismantled her narrative, presenting emails between Vanessa and Tom that predated her relationship with Rick, revealing the calculated nature of their connection. When confronted with these messages, Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "Those are private communications taken out of context," she snapped, her practiced vulnerability evaporating. "Richard had no right to access my personal emails." "So, you don't deny writing them?" Marcus pressed. Vanessa's eyes flashed with momentary panic before she regained control. "I deny the implication. Thomas was helping me network in Boston society. Any discussion of Richard was simply about making a good impression on an important potential contact." Next, Tom took the stand, projecting grave concern for his oldest friend. His testimony was more controlled than Vanessa's, acknowledging the evidence, but reinterpreting it through the lens of corporate necessity and personal concern. "Yes, I discussed having Richard evaluated," he admitted candidly. "When you've known someone for 15 years, you recognize when they're not themselves. The Richard Hartwell I know would never have become fixated on a street child's far-fetched story or imagined conspiracies against him." At the mention of Lily, Rick felt Sarah tense beside him. Lily herself remained remarkably still, her gaze fixed on Tom with an expression of quiet assessment beyond her years. When it was Rick's turn to testify, he presented his case with calm precision, walking through the discovery of the watch, his initial suspicions, and the methodical investigation that had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. He avoided emotional language or accusations, instead letting the evidence, the recordings, documents, and financial trails, speak for itself. "I didn't want to believe it," Rick concluded honestly. "I trusted these two people more than anyone else in my life. Accepting the truth was the hardest part." Bennett's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to portray Rick as paranoid and vindictive, a powerful man using his resources to persecute his wife and friend because he couldn't accept their genuine concern for his mental health. "Isn't it true, Mr. Hartwell," Bennett suggested silkily, "that you've been under tremendous stress with the European expansion? That you've had difficulty sleeping, become increasingly suspicious of colleagues, and fixated on minor incidents like the watch?" "I've been under normal business pressure," Rick replied evenly, "but I sleep well, maintain positive relationships with my executive team, and was not fixated on the watch until additional evidence suggested it was part of a larger pattern." The morning session concluded with both sides presenting their expert witnesses, psychological professionals with opposing interpretations of Rick's mental state and the legitimacy of his concerns. During the lunch recess, Rick found a quiet corner of the courthouse where Lily could eat the sandwich Marcus had arranged to have delivered. She had remained remarkably composed throughout the morning testimony, though Rick noticed her, flinching slightly whenever Tom or Vanessa spoke about her dismissively. "You're doing great," Rick told her. "Just sitting there patiently is helping our case." Lily nodded, picking at her sandwich. "They keep talking about me like I'm not real, like I'm just making things up." "That's because they're scared of you," Rick explained gently. "You saw the truth when they were counting on everyone believing their lies." "Mr. Reynolds says I might have to talk this afternoon." "Only if you're ready," Rick assured her, "and only for a little while." When court reconvened, Bennett immediately challenged Lily's competence as a witness, arguing that a 12-year-old from a disadvantaged background was susceptible to manipulation and suggestion, particularly when financial incentives might be involved. "Your Honor, the entire foundation of Mr. Hartwell's conspiracy theory rests on the word of an impressionable child who stands to benefit substantially from her cooperation," Bennett argued. We request that any testimony from the minor be excluded as inherently unreliable. Judge Hargrove considered the request before responding. I'll allow the child's testimony, but with protective conditions. She'll speak from my chambers with only counsel present, and I'll personally monitor the questioning to ensure it remains appropriate. 30 minutes later, Lily sat in the judge's chambers, perched on the edge of a leather chair that seemed to swallow her small frame. Sarah remained by her side with Marcus, Bennett, the judge, and a court reporter, completing the small audience. Lily, Judge Hargrove began kindly, do you understand what it means to tell the truth in court? Yes, sir, she replied clearly. It means saying exactly what happened, not what you wish happened or what someone wants you to say happened. The judge nodded approvingly. That's right. And you understand that you're here to help me learn the truth about some important matters. Yes, sir. I'm supposed to tell you what I saw with the watch and the people following me. Exactly. Now can you tell me in your own words what happened the day you first met Mr. Hartwell? Lily took a deep breath and recounted the incident with remarkable clarity. How she had witnessed the well-dressed man bumping into Mrs. Hartwell, the items spilling from the purse, and finding the watch with its attached note. I didn't read the whole note, she added conscientiously. Just saw that it looked like a love letter. That's why I thought it was strange that she'd have a man's watch and a love note in her purse when she was already with her husband. Bennett's cross-examination was carefully modulated, his usual, aggressive style tempered by the setting and the judge's watchful presence. He focused on potential inconsistencies in Lily's story, suggesting she might have been coached or influenced by promises of reward. Isn't it true that Mr. Hartwell has provided housing and financial support to you and your mother since you told him this story? Bennett asked. He helped us when those men started following me, Lily corrected, the ones taking pictures outside my school. And did you ever actually see these alleged men speak with Mr. Blackwood or receive instructions from him? No, Lily admitted, but the car was registered to a company Mr. Blackwood uses. Mr. Hartwell showed me the records. Bennett seized on this. So your belief that Mr. Blackwood was having you followed is based entirely on what Mr. Hartwell told you, correct? Lily frowned slightly, considering the question carefully. No, it's based on them following me after I told Mr. Hartwell what I saw. Before that, nobody cared what I noticed. After that, suddenly men in expensive cars were taking my picture and following me home from school. The simple logic of her response temporarily silenced Bennett, causing Judge Hargrove to suppress a smile. When the questioning concluded, the judge thanked Lily for her help and instructed everyone to return to the courtroom for final arguments. As they exited the chambers, Bennett pulled his clients aside for an urgent conference in a private room. 20 minutes later, when proceedings resumed, Bennett approached the bench with an unexpected request. Your Honor, my clients would like to propose a settlement agreement to resolve this matter without further litigation. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Rick exchanged surprised glances with Marcus. Judge Hargrove raised an eyebrow. I'm listening, Counselor. The terms Bennett outlined were remarkable in their comprehensiveness. Tom would resign from Hartwell, investments immediately, and surrender all shares and options in the company. Vanessa would agree to an expedited, uncontested divorce with a minimal settlement. Both would consent to permanent restraining orders prohibiting contact with Rick, Lily, or Sarah. In exchange, Rick would agree not to pursue criminal charges related to the conspiracy. Judge Hargrove looked to Rick. Mr. Hartwell, do you wish to consider this proposal? Rick leaned close to Marcus, whispering urgently, Why the sudden capitulation? Lily, Marcus whispered back. She was too credible, too consistent. They know if this proceeds to a full hearing or criminal investigation, her testimony will devastate them. They're cutting their losses. Rick nodded slowly, understanding the calculation behind the offer. Tom and Vanessa were abandoning their financial ambitions in exchange for avoiding potential criminal prosecution, and the public humiliation of being outmaneuvered by a 12-year-old girl they had dismissively called a street urchin. We accept the broad terms, Your Honor, Rick announced, with one addition. Mr. Blackwood and Mrs. Hartwell must also sign binding non-disclosure agreements regarding Lily Parker and her mother. Their privacy and safety are non-negotiable. Bennett conferred briefly with his clients before nodding agreement. Judge Hargrove directed the attorneys to draft the formal settlement for his review, effectively concluding the proceedings. As the courtroom emptied, Rick noticed Eleanor Blackwood, sitting quietly in the back row. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them before she slipped out a side door, her testimony ultimately unnecessary, but her courage in coming forward still significant. Outside the courthouse, Rick knelt to Lily's level amid the dispersing crowd. "You were amazing in there, absolutely perfect." She shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do," Sarah said, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I'm so proud of you." As Marcus arranged for their transportation, Rick contemplated the extraordinary turn of events. In just 10 days, his life had been completely transformed. His marriage revealed as a sham, his closest friendship exposed as a long-term betrayal, his company nearly stolen from under him. Yet somehow, standing on those courthouse steps with Lily's simple integrity still resonating in his mind, he felt lighter than he had in years. The truth, however painful, had set him free. 6 months later, Rick stood at the railing of his boat on Lake Winnipesaukee, watching Lily demonstrate a casting technique to her mother. The spring sunshine sparkled on the water, and the lakeside property, no longer a corporate retreat but now Rick's personal residence, was bursting with new growth. The aftermath of Tom and Vanessa's conspiracy had been painful, but ultimately cleansing. Hartwell Investments had not only survived but thrived under Rick's refocused leadership. Tom had relocated to Arizona, reportedly working as a consultant far from the Boston financial world he had once dominated. Vanessa had returned to California, attempting to resurrect her acting career with limited success. The divorce had been finalized quickly, the corporate restructuring completed efficiently, and the legal consequences contained as agreed in the settlement. Life had gradually established a new normal, one that, somewhat to Rick's surprise, included regular visits from Sarah and Lily. "Mr. Hartwell," Lily called excitedly. "I think I've got one." Rick moved to her side, watching as she skillfully played the fish on her line. At 13 now, she had grown an inch or two since their first meeting, though she maintained the same serious eyes and determined spirit. "Easy now," he coached. "Don't rush it." With practiced patience, Lily eventually landed a respectable base, grinning triumphantly as she carefully removed the hook before releasing it back into the lake. "You've become quite the angler," Rick observed proudly. "Better than you, anyway," she teased, the comfort of their friendship evident in her willingness to joke with him. Sarah watched their interaction with a smile, her own life transformed in recent months. With Rick's help, she had returned to nursing full-time at Massachusetts General Hospital, ironically the very institution where Tom had planned to have Rick committed. Lily was thriving at a new school, their financial worries alleviated by the settlement Rick had insisted on providing, despite their initial reluctance. As the afternoon lengthened, they returned to the main house for dinner, a routine that had become comfortably familiar over the months. While Sarah prepared the meal, Rick helped Lily with a science project, their heads bent together over the dining room table as they discussed experimental design. Over dinner, the conversation turned to summer plans. "I was thinking," Rick said, carefully, "that if you both were interested, we might formalize our arrangement." Sarah looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I've been consulting with Marcus about adoption," Rick explained, watching Lily's expression carefully. "If you're comfortable with it, Lily, I'd like to make our connection official. You would remain with your mother, of course, but I would have legal responsibility as well, like a second parent." Lily's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening. "You want to adopt me, for real?" "Only if you want that too," Rick assured her hastily. "There's no pressure and nothing would change in practical terms. It would just make official what we already feel." Lily looked to her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "It's your decision, honey. Mr. Hartwell and I have discussed it." And I'm supportive if this is what you want. For a moment, Lily seemed overwhelmed by the proposition. Then she set down her fork deliberately and fixed Rick with her direct gaze. Would I call you Dad? The question caught Rick off guard. You could. Call me whatever feels right to you. Rick is still fine, or Mr. Hartwell, or anything else that feels comfortable. Lily considered this seriously in the methodical way she approached all important decisions. I think I'd like to try Dad. Not right away, maybe, but someday. When it feels natural. Rick felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. I'd be honored whenever you're ready. 3 weeks later, Rick, Sarah, and Lily celebrated the formal adoption filing with dinner at Sorellina, the very restaurant where Rick and Vanessa had dined before the fateful watch incident nearly a year earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost. On Rick as they were led to a table near the same window where he had once sat with a woman who had never truly loved him. As they settled into their seats, Lily looked around at the elegant surroundings with wide-eyed appreciation. This is fancy, special occasion, special restaurant, Rick replied with a smile. Throughout dinner, Rick found himself marveling at how profoundly his life had changed. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately led him to something more valuable than anything he had lost. A genuine family built on truth rather than deception, on mutual respect rather than manipulation. When dessert arrived, a chocolate creation that drew an exclamation of delight from Lily, Rick raised his water glass in a toast. To new beginnings. To family, Sarah added, raising her own glass. Lily lifted her glass solemnly. To telling the truth, even when it's hard. As they clinked glasses, Rick reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on a Boston sidewalk to a formal family bond, their lives had become intertwined through crisis, courage, and ultimately choice. The decision to trust again despite past wounds, to build something authentic from the ashes of betrayal. Outside the restaurant, as they waited for the valet to bring Rick's car, Lily slipped her hand into his, a small gesture that felt momentous in its simple trust. Rick squeezed gently, silently promising to honor that trust for all the days to come. The betrayal had been real. The pain had been genuine. But standing there with Lily's hand in his and Sarah's gentle presence beside them, Rick understood that true family wasn't defined by legal documents or shared DNA, but by the willingness to stand together through life's storms, to speak truth when lies would be easier, and to recognize that sometimes the most precious connections emerge from our most difficult moments. As they drove home through the Boston night, Rick glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily, who had fallen asleep in the back seat. In her peaceful expression, he saw not just his present joy but his future purpose, a reminder that even the darkest betrayal could lead to unexpected light.